Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Tuesday Stroke Buddies support group meeting. Today, we've got Dr. Tom Broussard. He has an interesting story, and he's done a lot of what I like to call pay it forward work for the aphasia community, being a survivor himself. I find it remarkable how many people take the experience that happened to them and try in some small or large way to make it easier for the next person. And Dr. Broussard is someone who's done it in a large way with a number of uh, organizations that he's formed. And I believe he's kind of like me, pretty much does it full time these days. So rather than let me tell his story, I'm going to ask him to tell a little bit about his stroke and recovery story because he totally lost all communication. And so that'll be fascinating. And then a little bit about his work. And eventually, I want to get to seeing how our community might be able to help his community working together to do more towards bringing aphasia awareness and resources to the stroke survivors and their family caregivers, significant others, and the people that help them. Because as we all know, stroke happens to more than one person. It happens to the people around them as well. So, Dr. Broussard, take it away.
Thank you, Ralph. Thanks, everybody. I do appreciate coming to visit with you all. Although you did say I lost all communication, what I had was able to communicate. It just didn't come out terribly well in each of these modalities. But we'll talk about that as I go forward. The short story of how it happened was I was a dean at the Heller School at Brandeis University outside of Boston, and my wife and I were walking that evening, and my wife was walking ahead of me, and in the middle of the street, the last thing I remembered was looking at my shoes, and that was it. Apparently now, because now my wife can tell what was happening when she turned around, she saw that I was crawling to a pole out on the street, on the curb, and she came running back and said, obviously, you must be having a stroke. Of course, at that point, I had no idea. And she dragged me 210 feet. I've been there many times speaking and taking measurements to the CVS and to the pharmacy in the back. So it's 310 feet. I have no idea how she got me there. I ask her all the time, and she says, well, your body would still move, even though I was paralyzed on the right side. And she could just sort of push me and pull me, and I would keep on moving. So the body is an amazing thing. The brain is an amazing thing, that it was still conscious enough to do what my wife wanted me to do, was keep on moving. And she got me to the back, threw me in that chair and called 911. I woke up at that point, and I say that frequently. When I woke up, it was me becoming more conscious of the world around me. And I woke up and I could see there were people around me. I was in a store of some kind, and the people were, as you would know, gawking. You know, when there's an accident out on the street and everybody sort of stops, especially a car accident, and people look. So apparently, and I say this because only my wife could tell me this later, although once I could express it to her, then she could see the balance between the two of us. I started looking too. I started gawking. I was looking like this because I thought, boy, there must be an accident here somewhere. These people are all looking and looking. Of course, I didn't realize that I was the accident because my wife had called immediately for 911, and all the people in a crowd, obviously they get out of the way when somebody's having a stroke right in front of them. And that doesn't happen often, that you actually see a person right in front of you having a stroke. So I went to sleep again and didn't wake up. Well, actually, I did wake up again. They put me in the gurney and I woke up again. So I don't know how I got from that chair to the gurney. But I woke up on the gurney, and there were two people there, two EMTs, one on the left, one on the right. The one on my left was talking to me, comforting me. Again, I thought, he's a nice guy. This is me on the inside. He's a nice guy. I don't know why he likes me. Had no idea that I had a stroke. I really, you know how it is when you have a stroke. You really have really don't fully understand what's happening. But I could see him. But the one on my right, he was also strapping me in, but I couldn't see him, but I figured he was just behind me until his hand came over to keep on strapping, and I could see his hand sliced off at the wrist. And in my head, I thought, huh, that's sort of interesting because I can see his hand, but I can't see the rest of his body. And it went away. A minute later, he did it again. A second later, he put it again. I thought, huh, something's odd. Again, this is me on the inside. But then he finally stuck his head in while he was strapping me. And there was his head, had a beard, sliced off at the neck. And he was doing his thing, doing his hair. And he looked like a balloon on a string, you know, except with a beard. And he disappeared again. And at that point, A, I went to sleep, but B, I remembered what had happened. And it was a couple months later when I could tell my wife what it looked like from my perspective. And she said, yeah, you had woken up and you were looking around. And that was me on the inside. So that was all very interesting. Even that memory has its capacity to remember when you're having the stroke. Even they were more sudden things that I could understand them. Anyway, I went to sleep again and I didn't wake up again until got to the hospital. They did all the checks. They thought I would get TPA. It happened at about 8:30 in the evening. We got there by 9:30. They did all the tests, and about 10:30, they were ready to give me the TPA, and they gone through all the paperwork. And again, my wife was there, and they were looking through the paperwork and said, oh, wait a second, guys. This guy was here 3 months before. I was there for open heart surgery, aortic valve replacement, and a quadruple bypass. And it was just 3 months before. And their protocol at that hospital was 6 months, because the TPA is so powerful that it will dissolve every clot in your body, including the clots that are needed when you have your surgery, major surgery. But they thought I was fit. They talked to my wife. I just started work a week before, going back to work, and yeah, a week before. And they said, okay, he's going to get TPA, and I got it. Of course, all this time I was asleep. So they gave me the TPA, and I woke up with a vengeance, as they say, because I woke up screaming and beating myself on the left side in the Broca's area, which is where the stroke was. And they had to strap me down because I was really screaming and beating myself. And my wife was there and the nurse. And it was months later when when I could finally explain to her what it sounded like to me on the inside was this incredible noise, like popcorn popping almost. And clearly it was here, and I was beating myself here. And she said, that's what you were doing. We had no idea. You woke up and started screaming and beating yourself. And that went on for, less than an hour. Then I went back to sleep again. But that was also interesting because I did remember that and couldn't express that until months later. But that was on Monday evening. I woke up again on Wednesday. And when I woke up, I thought it was a beautiful hotel. I had no idea why I was there, what was going on. And of course, they tried to explain it to me. For the most part, I could understand what they were saying, but I still didn't know what was going on. But they said, you're here on Wednesday, you'll go home eventually. And that's all I wanted to say after that was, I want to go home. I want to go home. And I don't even know how I was actually trying to express that. Because they said, but you can walk here on the floor as much as you want. And I did. And there were lots of open doors, and I would put my head in and I could see there were terrible accidents, strokes. I could tell I was in a neuro ward of some kind, and I was with them. But I kept coming out and looking at myself and saw I can walk, my hands work. I could see. I had no idea why I was there, if I was, quote, okay, physically. Of course, at that point, I had no idea that I had this thing called aphasia. And they had an assessment on Thursday, told me I had aphasia, but at that point, I still couldn't understand who this person was, never mind what she was telling me. And I finally went home on Saturday. And that was really the beginning of this journey, because, well, it's for all of us. I'm just incredibly lucky. There's a continuum of severity, and clearly I was not as severe as many other people. Many of my friends who were mute, anyway, I was never mute. And even my friends who are totally mute are now much better at being able to communicate. So I realized that I was at the top of the line in terms of being able to recover. And I had lots of lifelong habits that also let me get better, but based on the habits I had done before my stroke. So that too is an important component of how people do get better from aphasia, given that the therapist will typically tell you that, well, there's the 5 rules to aphasia recovery. One is motivation, right? It has to be, and whether it's aphasia or you want to be a marathon and you broke your leg. I mean, there's any number of things that have motivation to do it. 2 is practice. 3 is practice, 4 is practice, 5 is practice. So that's pretty much the way they told us all the time. And I believe them. But I didn't know that all of my habits, when it comes to aphasia, because it was my language that turned out to be the issue, that my habits of reading, writing, and speaking was my habit to do that before. I then started reading, writing, and speaking, not knowing for quite a few months that what I was writing didn't make any sense. And that too becomes part of me being lucky in this way. I started a diary a month after my stroke, just as I was starting with my therapy. It was about a month I was home alone, other than my wife, waiting for my brain to settle down. That often takes at least a month, if not longer. But sure enough, after about a month, then I could sleep better, eat better, could better understand the world around me better, and started a diary, because I still had some of these old black and white books that we all have had when we were kids. I still had a couple extras because I would use them on trips. I would always be writing on my trips about what we were building. I was the director of engineering and design at Bath Iron Works in Bath, Maine. So we were always building ships for the Navy, and that's how I happened to do my work, was writing what turns out to be graphs and charts of what we were, quote, thinking about or doing or building. So I started that diary. It turns out to be a 500-page diary. And for the first 200 pages, I did not know that what I was writing didn't make any sense. Most of the words were spelled properly, unless they were longer words. But what I didn't know was that in addition to my writing in text, even though the words were individually spelled properly, you put them together, they don't make any sense. So that is also part of what I figured out, was it didn't have a whole lot to do with my, quote, language itself, but the connectivity that it happens when it comes to the neural networks, that you can have lots and lots and lots of cells, but they have to be bound into these networks. And when you lose a portion of those cells, then you could very well lose a portion of the critical mass of being able to now do what it used to do. And you have to grow new dendrites and synapses to actually get my language back again. But in addition to my text that didn't make any sense, and again, I didn't know that for 11 months, I also was writing with graphs, charts, and metaphorical drawings that do make a lot of sense. So even you would look at some of those pictures and you go, oh, that's what Tom was thinking. You look at the words below and go, I don't know what Tom was thinking. So you'd be able to see that. And again, as I mentioned, I didn't know until 11 months later, still writing in that diary, and at a library in St. Augustine, Florida. And while writing it, I felt another click in my head. I mean, physically, I felt something, I'll say wrong, but I was always going back and looking at all of my entries, right? So I went back and looked again, the first entry, pointed at it. I said, oh my God, who wrote that? I said, it's awful. First time, it was awful. Up to then, I thought it looked fine. It turns out that reading, writing, and speaking are modalities of communication, and awareness has its own skill and its own deficit. So clearly, I was not aware that what I was, quote, writing, even though I thought it was fine, probably on the inside, I thought it was fine because what I was writing were words that made sense, but they weren't connected. So they obviously the grammar and syntax were damaged. But as you can see from my work, and I ended up writing my first book, and it ends at 11 months. And I wrote as fast as I could because literally I saw awareness coming and unawareness leaving. And I wrote as fast as I could, 15 pages in my diary, and told the world that my eyes have now acclimated to a new altitude, and I can now see what I couldn't see before. And I wrote all that down, knowing that if I don't write this down, it'll be forgotten in a minute. And I will never be able to express this to anybody else. So that's how it ends at 11 months on book 1. So that's the process when writing. Then all these other modalities entered in, again, without necessarily knowing. I started taking pictures while walking, because I had to walk because of my heart surgery. And I started taking pictures of the world around me because I could begin to see signs on the street, like a stop sign. I was very excited that it said stop, and I knew it said stop. And speed limit, I was excited about that too, because I knew what that meant. But I found other signs that were longer, apparently sentences, obviously, but the individual words I could see, but I couldn't understand what they meant. That's when I started taking pictures, and I'd bring them to my wife, and I would say, okay, here's the picture of this. It was a church in particular with a big plaque. And I say, what does this mean? And it starts with the word that unites. I'm not even getting it right. The words that unites. And she would tell me the word, and I say, I don't know what that means. I could understand. I started what I call boxing words. If I could look at individual words, but make sure there's nothing around it, I could see, oh, the. But once trying to say it in a sentence, I couldn't get to it. So I started taking pictures, hundreds of pictures, and I started recording myself, again, with this phone. Again, all by my habit. I like to keep track of my life. I have a great diary. I have a great calendar, and literally ended up recording 202 recordings over 18 months. Not every day, but sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 times a day. And I would listen to myself. I thought, oh, this sounds great. Again, I didn't know it took me years to get them all transcribed. Then I got to see what I was actually saying, because I was saying words, but there's any number of additional therapeutic aphasia related words that say, oh, he was substituting words, using different words. When I wanted to say this, out came another word. But that is the process, not only of how I got better, but it turns out that these activities, whether they were good or bad words or listening or pictures, it's the activity themselves. That is what drives the experience-dependent neuroplasticity. That is what drives me to get better using those activities and induce plasticity. And the more activity, the more plasticity gets induced. And if there's less, then there's less. Again, I didn't know any of that. I was not aware, had no idea that what I was doing was therapeutic, but it was my habit, and it was a good habit. I always did this for a long, long time. So that is the process by which I, quote, got better. At 11 months was the start of it. Then I still had to be able to write really well and then be able to speak very well. And that took another 2 to 3 years to be able to have a really decent conversation. And I had put myself in positions where I would have to speak well in front of groups, and ended up, had a friend of mine who's the president of one group, and I came and spoke. And by the time it was over, I was crying and cursing and walked off the stage and said, sorry. And it took me another year to be able to have this conversation. But many, many humans don't really like speaking to the public, which I always did before. But I can tell, all of us can tell, that's a large amount of emotion that goes into speaking to the public. And clearly that was what was happening to me. I was terrified, basically, to be in front of that group. But again, these are all the stages by which I get better. And even to this day, because I did record all this information, I've been mining that, and I continue to mine what it was that I had been doing that would be therapeutic. And that is then how I go help other people better understand. Now an even bigger way, because it turns out that many of these people with aphasia has an awful lot to do with who they were before their stroke, and how they can then excavate their memory and their ideas and their information from before, and whether they're even knowing that it's therapeutic to continue to do that. And all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but yes, you'll start to get better as a result of doing more of these things rather than less. And that's how it basically started. If you have questions at this point, go ahead.
Well, I found what you said about it having to do with who they were before kind of interesting. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Uh,
And by the way, I also put myself in situations where I was forced, where I was uncomfortable, and I kind of forced myself to have to perform. I found that worked really well for me, as long as I only did not too large of a stretch.
right.
Um, especially involving public events. I'm a video guy, so a lot of mine were involved, showing up and videoing.
Right.
So anyway, I'd love to know more about your thoughts on how the person rediscovering themselves, how that facilitates their recovery.
Well, I think, and of course, what I think really doesn't matter to anybody. uh, I just, I just happen to be a person who had, and this is even before my stroke, I was always looking for my earliest memory before my stroke of my parents, right? Looking for the earliest memory that I had and looking for what I called, again, before my stroke, the headwaters of who I was, who I became eventually, right? Who are the things that made me who I am? Um, and this is all before my stroke, but I started realizing, okay, these are very important things that help us understand how those habits, successful habits, are built over time. um, that, well, the way the brain works, it does engrage the neurological network. So you do remember these things early in life. Um, and then beginning to realize that those things are what was happening to what was helping me with going forward. So then after my stroke, not at all realizing that what I was thinking about and trying to pursue were therapeutic. I just did it because that's the way it was. My dad, and it really has an awful lot to do with my dad. He would do good things. I would say great things, but again, nobody's a good or bad dad. I mean, he just did things. And when I was in fourth grade, I told Dad, I said, Dad, I want to go to the Naval Academy. I want to go to sea. And Dad was having his papers, you know how parents are back then. He's looking at his papers like this. He's looking at the papers like this. And, oh yeah, okay, Tom, that's good. He says, and Dad said, I said, what should I do? And Dad said, well, you got to work hard, do a good job, learn a lot about math and science, and that's it. I said, okay, Dad, I can do that. Well, I ended up doing that. Why? Because in fourth grade, Dad said, here's what you have to do if that's what you want to do. So after my stroke, when I was realizing that all of the trajectory of my memory finally came together with who I was after my stroke, and they came together this way. Because if I hadn't remembered all this, I would be here and go, I'm not sure what I should do, what I should act on, how I should act, if I didn't actually also find what had happened to me in a good way with my life. So now when I connected with my new life, meaning, oh, goodness gracious, I really did lose my language in all kinds of modalities, right? Reading, writing, and speaking with various components of those modalities that were damaged. That's when I began to see that I could go back in time to the motivational force, basically, that allowed me to then go, oh, this is how I got better, because I did what Dad did. I'll say Dad and Mom way back then. And it just started this trajectory that would live forever without ever knowing I had this stroke until I had it. And then they came together with becoming more aware about the new world, my new world, because my old world, I could remember that. And then eventually I could express that. But the new world was, I didn't know that I couldn't express those things. And I thought, well, gosh, how can I ever talk about it until I can find all this information going forward? So I think that's how it happens with me. Yeah.
Okay. How about telling us a little bit about after you recovered, well, you've written several books and you formed several organizations. Talk a little bit about when you transitioned to helping other people and where that's led you with your work.
Sure. I always start with long stories and I always try to make them short. Let's see. Um, when when I went to the Naval Academy and then I went to sea, I really loved going to sea. But I ended up leaving the Navy and went into shipbuilding. and building ships for the Navy. Again, a lot of fun. You still go out to sea with these ships you're building. So that too is a lot of fun. But then, because I read a department of several hundred people, I began to realize that what I was really doing was building shipbuilders themselves. So that's when I moved from engineering into education. So because I'd gone through this transition from sailing ships to building shipbuilders, left that all of that and went into education and started with another company called Career Prospects, and helped people better understand their work, how they could get work, and that often used a lot of educational components. I was not a teacher, but I was an educator with lots and lots of people and organizations. But I was doing that company for 15 years, and I thought I need to get another tool to help me get better at helping these people. Some have better, some have less in terms of the information they need to move forward. And I went to the Heller School outside of Boston, and got my research PhD late in life. I was 54 when I got my PhD. Went to Vassar for one semester and then went back to the Heller School and became the assistant and then associate dean there. And then I was there until I had the stroke. So that's that process of transitioning. Then after my stroke, as I began to understand, there are a lot of, well, humans are humans, right? And organizations are organizations, and there are a lot of gaps in the aphasia world in terms of helping people better understand how they can do better and how they can do better earlier if the therapeutic community does quote more of these things, as well as these other stovepipes who really, as I started studying more, and this is where that skill came. It turns out the last skill I needed was the skill of working at the Heller School as a research person, who actually, my specialty was helping people with disabilities, as it turns out. So that is when I realized that the stovepipes are real. And I'll give you a good example. I did a study in Florida, also other places around the country, of hospitals who do not use a lexicon of aphasia. They don't use it at all. They won't use that word or any of the associated words other than, oh, they're having trouble speaking. You know, I mean, think about all the other words that are well known in the public consciousness of Parkinson's disease and PDF and HIV. Everybody knows that, yet the people with aphasia there are many more people with aphasia than there are people with Parkinson's disease, as an example. But nobody knows anything about it. Well, it turns out that the hospitals, since they do not use the word, if you put aphasia on their search box, you know, the box there, it'll come out and say, sorry, we don't know what that is. You have SLPs, speech language pathologies, in that hospital. They don't even use the word aphasia. Even on their website, it'll say, oh, they're having trouble speaking. Well, that's sort of the beginning of this, but it's hardly the end, especially when it comes to aphasia that, again, 2.4 million people are living today with aphasia in the United States, and that shouldn't be. It should not be. And I've had hospitals looking at this on their own website, and they are aghast. They haven't been able to figure this out yet and actually change it, but it has to be done. And the same thing happens with the American Hospital Association, where I sent a big letter in some of my books. And if you go to that website, if you put in stroke, it'll have about 150 hits, 200 hits. If you put in aphasia, you'd be lucky if you get 1 or 2, and they won't really talk about aphasia much. So this is part of what I began to understand is the stovepipes of the medical, somewhat fractured, but not to say in a bad way, but just the way the world is today in the United States anyway. And one thing is they need to learn an awful lot more about aphasia and get to the point of people understanding, like even the police people. So I've been training police departments for the very same reason. They look at us driving a car, talking, pulled over, and it might sound like we're drunk. Yeah, and that's not so good. One of my friends who works with me here, and she's with me, she's obviously didn't lost her language, but not her intellect, does a very, very good job with me talking. And they look at her and go, oh, you mean you're not drunk? So yes, this is part of the people like the police department, fire, and others to understand better how aphasia is. So how now doing flyers and things and visors on their cars, so people can go immediately, oh, this guy has aphasia, this person has aphasia. So that's what Aphasia Nation is all about, is really educating not only people with aphasia, but educating the wider public and sort of working our way into that wider public in any number of ways to address the public consciousness so that they can begin to understand how the brain really does work. Because at this day and time, everybody knows about photosynthesis. When we were little, converting light into green leaves, nobody, that's not true, a lot of people, but not many public, wider public, know that plasticity simply converts thought and cognitive activities into brain matter. The same thing. Yet we don't know anything about the brain. Even to know a little bit about the brain allows you to become more purposeful about the learning it is that you want to address. If you just understand just a little bit about the 10 principles of plasticity, as Bruce would talk about, I am sure.
Well, it's interesting. So do you make something that goes on their visor that says they have aphasia or something?
Yep. Oh yeah, it gives all the I'm making a new one.
The person who I wanted to be here today, Kristen, has an idea called Voice for the Voiceless, and she's talking about making a bracelet or some other similar thought, a way of identifying yourself so that you don't get mistaken for drunk or something else. Interesting.
Yeah, we're working on. It goes in stages of therapeutic activities that can be useful in terms of awareness. And the first 10 activities, although there are many more, I'll give you this one even before I think about that one. It turns out that the brain injury population, that you see that way in the country, they are typically referring to TBI people. Although they'll also refer to stroke, but they won't refer to aphasia. I'll say hardly at all. I say that because they got a hold of me last year here in Maine when we just moved back up to Maine, and they who I was, and they said, "Oh, can you come talk to our brain injury group?" And I said, "Oh, yes, we always want to do that, but you know, nobody really wants to talk with us. We're just stroke and aphasia people." And they said, "No, we'd love to learn more about this. We've heard about plasticity a little, but we're stovepipes, you know." They work on their brain injury things or acquired brain injury. They don't really think about aphasia because why? It's an invisible disorder, and it's invisible to the public, right? So they couldn't understand that. So they did ask me to come. I ended up being a speaker for that, and they got me into, and I just got this letter yesterday from the governor appointed to this council, the Acquired Brain Injury Advisory Council, where they just got a $1.5 million for 5 years, helping educate the people of Maine about brain injuries, including aphasia. Good. And that's never been done before. Never. And they're using actually some of the words identifying the gaps in services. That's their words. Those are my words there. And that's what we're going to be working on. And again, this is just a part of how we get better. But the first 10 activities that I just discovered earlier, or that I listed, are long before this, because it takes a lot of work to get to this point. But the others are having your have a car registration become aphasia. Why doesn't every state at least have one? Because people get to see it a lot. So I finally got mine done here in Maine, and sure enough, people taking pictures, send it to me. Who is this? What is that? And lots of these car magnets that are number 2 is buying the license plate. Number 2 is buying these particular. I should have bought this over here. Buying these things, and you put that on your car. It's a magnet, and then people go, "Oh, loss of language, not intellect." So. And then my articles and my books and several other things that are easy for anybody to do. We call aphasia rocks. So we get rocks and we paint them up with aphasia, and you put on both sides and you put them out on the street. You know, kids see them, people see them all over the place on their walking trails here in Maine, and people see them. They say aphasia, and they pick it up. Oh, turn it over. It says stroke, aphasia. Oh, they put it down. You know, people get to see that kind of thing. Just traveling art, I think they call it. So there's lots of things we can do, really, as that first wave of helping people better understand it to the public.
Well, I have somebody else that I want to put you in touch with in addition to Kristen, and that would be a guy named David that I was introduced to through Med Rhythms that I'm working on getting you involved with. And he runs something, a traumatic brain injury awareness group. I'll send you a link and his email and everything. Sure. And he's got a community of about 40,000 people, pretty significant community.
Sure.
And well, one of the reasons that I got put together with him was a couple of years ago, he decided that, you know, stroke was really very close to what he was doing. And they started including stroke survivor resources and stories and such in their community. And I don't know what, if anything, they're doing with aphasia, but somebody that's open to bringing stroke into a TBI community is also going to be interested in bringing aphasia into it. So if they're not doing as much as they could, or they aren't doing much of anything, maybe we can get them, get you guys hooked up and get them going on it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So far, you've described a lot of awareness, which is absolutely, you know, where anything starts. If you're not aware of any kind of a problem, you can't really address the problem. Do you also work in providing any kind of recovery type resources and things to facilitate the actual process once people are aware of it? I mean, it seems to me it would be a good a 1-2 punch. Make them aware and then tell them what they, you know, some things that have helped you and helped other people and what they
absolutely
where they can turn. So I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, given what I mentioned about hospitals not using the lexicon of aphasia and being stovepipes, meaning they're passed over to the rehab community, but their mission is to stabilize us and get us ready to go to the rehab facility. I mean, that's the way it works. And again, there's nothing bad about any of this. It's just the way it works. But what I also didn't realize, because I saved everything, when I was leaving, I got a non-prescriptive piece of paper that says, one piece of paper, and it said, you're going to go to a rehab facility, a hospital. Here's a list of all these brain diseases and disorders. Dun, 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 dun. One piece of paper. One bullet was aphasia, loss of language. That was it. Now, I couldn't read it anyway, but my wife had it and she saved it. I put everything in boxes, so I still had it. And I didn't realize that that's it. I mean, I went home for a month. They don't give you any information other than what you can do online. And of course, my wife did start looking at things on aphasia, but it takes a long time to learn about aphasia. I say years, unless you can read some particular things, but then it's more difficult then too. So that's when I was started doing another set of books. I just finished the first one I mentioned to you, but I'll show it to you anyway. That happens to be, this is the first one that ends at 11 months when I could now be aware. This is number 2. This is The Secret. It's all about the doing. Again, not realizing that all that doing was how I got better. But now I have to tell other people, oh, you have to do this on purpose. And you can't do it just once or twice a week for an hour. You have to be more purposefully that everything you do is therapeutic, especially if you become more aware of that. And then the third book is this Just So Stories, just like Rudyard Kipling, Just So Stories, how aphasia got its language back. And I wrote 34 chapters, basically stories of what I was seeing on the inside. Lots and lots of them are helpful. But I was writing my 4th book, and I decided, because I still have it here, but it's going to be a couple books away. And I wrote this book on purpose, as if it's written for kids, but it's not. This is the ABCs of aphasia. And I've been donating this to hospitals because when they leave, at least give them this baton so they leave with something in their hands, because they really have no idea other than this word called aphasia, especially at the very beginning. So this is made so that even the person with aphasia and a person with stroke, they start looking at this and they start to see the images. So they get to see the images. And then you see a little bit more information, but it's the images really for me, because I could see these images and I could understand that's the brain going forward. But this allowed me to better understand that looking at plasticity, you go, oh, the brain is building up its muscles. So you look at that image and then you get to see the text and then you get to understand more. And then you end up with a huge glossary and the 22 organizations in the country that you need to go to if you need to find out more about aphasia. So yes, it has everything here, including a plan for recovery, which they often don't provide a plan either. So this is book 1 of this series. The second one is going to be published next month. This is the mock-up for it. Metaphors help us mend, because there's a tremendous amount of metaphors that I've figured out on my brain that help me get better, using a lot of, believe it or not, engineering knowledge about how we build ships when it came to our language. And then the next book is already drafted, and that's going to be Science and Scientists about Language and Aphasia. So you get to see some amazing people in the world, most people have never heard of, and you're going to go, but they understand this author, and they go, you're kidding me. You know, like there's one book called Broca's Brain. And I ask all these therapists and they don't know anything about it. I say, who do you think wrote it? And they go, I have no idea. Carl Sagan. Everybody knows about Carl Sagan, you know, billions and billions of stars. Turns out he wrote this book called Broca's Brain.
Wow.
Billions and billions of cells. So yes, even that is going to be one of my chapters in the book, because you know, you can find out all kinds of ways for people to better understand how the brain works, leading you into stroke and aphasia pathways.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. I had the similar idea because I felt like when I went out of the rehab hospital, I lost all my access to resources. So my first idea about less than a year after my stroke was to produce a DVD to hand to people like your ABC book. The basics of what you need to know. And since then, I never got to do that. I had a number of people interested in helping me, but I could never put together the entire budget. Well, I did with the Tri-State Stroke Network, but then the CDC pulled the plug on 5 regional stroke networks in their infinite wisdom, wiped them right off the planet. Anyway, so I had a similar idea, and I have someone else who I need to put you in touch with. So I heard, oh yeah, because this is, I told you earlier that when we talked before the call, that you would say things that would prompt me to think of other things. And this is one of them. You were talking about Dr. Sagan and various famous people. Well, I heard a report on NPR with General Michael Hayden, who ran the CIA, who has aphasia. And I'm just a little bit loony, probably like you are. And I said, well, I'll write to him and see if he wants to come on one Tuesday. And I did. And he said yes. And then the holidays happened, and I'm about to write him again. So I think he would be. And, oh, by the way, was it with Terry Gross or somebody else? Anyway, the title of the segment was, I Want to Do More.
You're right.
So he's a pretty famous name. Let's see if we can get him hooked up with you and see if he really wants to do more. I bet he does.
General Hayden, he's a nice fellow. We became friends a couple of years ago. And he arranged a panelist of him, me, and 2 SLPs from his school. You know, they have a school in George Mason with his name on it, right? So they have lots of resources there. So they set up this beautifully well done. And then of course he meaning General Hayden, has other friends in the PR world. NPR being among them, and have been helping him along the way. He is quite a star. So we're trying to get everything we can. He's working with Gavard Gifford out in Arizona also.
Right.
But it's, again, we have to keep pushing more than one or two stars. We have to pick hundreds, thousands of people who are really stars. I mean, all my friends are all stars. And we just need to get them, other people, to know who they are, what they went through, how the brain works, and Mike being one of those, definitely, for sure. But I'm glad that he's going to be on the show. You have to make sure I'm going to be watching when it comes.
I will. I need to write to him again. He said he would be willing to appear. I know he's very busy, and then it was Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I said, well, I'll write to him after the holidays. And here we are in February.
Right.
So I'll make sure I wrote it down. I thought little I know you already been on a panel with him, but
Hey, tell him I said hi, and I'll be watching when he's on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
I'm not above using that to get him on.
Oh yeah, definitely use my name.
I mean, just because I think I wrote to him and I said, I think that all voices for aphasia or any advocacy, any type of recovery are important. And I said, and I particularly think you have an important one. So I'll tell him, Tom's looking forward to
that is true. And
your appearance. So,
he is also on the board of the National Aphasia Association. He's on the board, just started less than a year ago, probably part of all of this work going on. I've been on the board and vice president of the National Aphasia Association for 3 years, and I just resigned because I also run Aphasia Nation, and it's been getting a lot more activity, more momentum. And I do so much work on Aphasia Nation, and I was also doing so much work on them, I couldn't do both of them because an awful lot of them are overlapping. So I think we're going to end up with National Aphasia Association and Aphasia Nation doing other similar, but not exactly the same as the National Aphasia. So I'll still be right there with everybody, but we'll have a different company.
Great. Two quick things, and I know you got a 12:30. We're nowhere near it. It's not even 12. But one is we have a lot of people interested in aphasia. Some of them have it. Some of them are caregivers. Some of them are just interested. Give us a little bit about what people can do to help move, push this rock uphill, this aphasia issue, what they might be able to do in terms of getting involved in your work. Are you looking for people to help you?
Yes. Yes. Like I said, with STARS, who are everybody basically, people who are interested in helping the wider public be educated about stroke, aphasia, and plasticity. So a lot of what I then do is with other people with aphasia who want to know more from me, from other people like Bruce and others, about what it really means, but they want to need more before they can then explain it to others. So I do both of those. And then, yes, I'm encouraging people to join the Aphasia Nation. You don't have to pay, you just have to show up. And I'm still working on the website. You'll get to see, oh, I could do this and this and this for no cost or little cost as you work your way through it. I mentioned before the various stages. One is going to rehab, retail stores. You think, well, who does that? Well, Staples. They have school month in September, and they have a lot of people there. And I go to and because some of the stores are better than others, but I found a manager here that likes it, and I set up a booth there on Saturday and Sunday of that big for sales weekend, and I greet everybody coming through the door with cards and things. I have a table there with all my work, and I hand it to everybody as they come through, and they say, "Oh, we'll get you on the way out." But I think I greeted the first time or the last time, I think, with almost 500 people talking about aphasia. They get to see these big things in my booth, and they're at Staples. Why? Because they're teachers. They have to learn better how this at the in September. But yes, So that's one more way to do it. So as long as you get these ideas, then people can go, oh, I can do that. Or I can go to my church place because they like people to come talk about aphasia. Synagogue, you name it. There's lots of places people could go to. Rotary, for crying out loud.
Cool.
I've
Bruce,
got a
yes,
question.
Bruce.
If I could ask a question of
Yes.
you, I think at the outset you mentioned that at least at first you had alexia with agraphia. You could not read or write.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if there was any particular exercise or therapy that helped you read and write.
Well, my writing, I'll start with that first. Since I was writing freehand, because it was different from off of a computer, they have completely different operations. So when I couldn't write on a computer at all, literally, I would get to the I, and I couldn't figure out, because you have to go to each individual letters. I could write this way perfectly. Oh, of course, it didn't make any sense. So it wasn't until at 11 months, and as I was reading a particular book, a really small book, and I was reading it every single day, over and over and over. I marked it up so much I had to buy another copy. So I think it's the repetition is what helped me realize, given what I also had seen at the beginning, where I could see individual words but couldn't express when tied together what they quote meant, right? So I knew that grammar and syntax was damaged. So I think it was starting with the 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. And boxing, that's another thing we can talk about. And then finally just reading all the time. Even though it wasn't like I was reading with any whole lot of information, but I would read it, okay, and then think about what I just read, a sentence or two, or particularly the topics of these of the table of contents. That was always very helpful to read them. Then I'd also look at their index and read that. Say, oh, Broca's brain, Broca's area, you know. So yeah, little by little.
That's interesting. And when you talk to people about aphasia, I wonder, do you distinguish between the various language disorders, like Broca's aphasia versus Wernicke's aphasia versus conduction aphasia?
Right, right. When I talk about it, of course, it's understanding aphasia, broadly speaking, with Broca's, Wiki's, global, all these other things, even primary progressive aphasia, which doesn't have anything to do with aphasia. So we talk about that a little bit, but then often there's at least one other SLP in all of my audiences. And then when they start talking about some of these additional things or more refined understandings of what aphasia really is, both below that, then I'll have them talk about it more from their perspective. But yes, yeah, there's several different kinds of aphasia.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else, Bruce?
Go
Well, I was wondering, you may not know exactly, but well, roughly where in the left hemisphere, more or less exactly, the stroke occurred, because as you, I'm sure know, Broca's aphasia would be caused by typically by a problem in the frontal lobe. Wernicke's aphasia by a problem in the temporal lobe, and alexia with agraphia problem in the angular gyrus, which is just posterior to the temporal lobe. So I was wondering, it almost sounds like it's more of a posterior Wernicke alexia with agraphia problem than a Broca's problem that you had.
Well,
am I correct or am I wrong?
Well, I think they described me as Broca's aphasia. Apparently, some of these other symptoms that were coming from not Broca's, but further back, but they said that was mild over here. So, and I really couldn't understand, probably still even don't, that all the activities I was doing was somehow, hopefully, helping fix all of these areas. But that's what I knew at the time. And I ended up, yeah. What I really like to do is memorize the geographic of the brain, like you say, all the gyres. I have a really hard time even understanding those words.
Well, I'm going to send you a presentation that Dr. Hetzler did called Language in the Brain, and it goes over all the various centers.
There you go. That'd be cool.
About how they, certain problems when doesn't pass information is also an issue. So you can have like an area that isn't affected, but correct me if I got this wrong, Dr. Hetzler. But you could have areas that aren't necessarily damaged, but they can't communicate with other areas that are essential to passing the information from one part of the brain.
Yes, that is true. Like the arcuate fasciculus interconnects Broca's area and Wernicke's area.
Right.
And that's how you talk to yourself and understand what you're saying.
That's kind of important, isn't it?
Oh, my
I would
God.
hope so, yes.
So that's interesting, because what Tom was talking about was he kind of had that connection because he was talking to himself, but he may have not had a connection further back because while he might have been talking to himself, he wasn't passing the right information because he says it doesn't make sense.
Right.
It's true.
By the way, just so you know, the second I said there were two things, how can people get involved? The other was going to be, I was going to open up to questions because I knew you had a couple of questions. Anybody else out there got any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
As a teacher, we normally two things are index card, little words, and then we eventually put them together to make a sentence. Is that possible with aphasia?
Well, ask that question again.
You know, as a teacher, we do index cards with words to teach the kids and eventually string them together as sentences.
Yes.
Is that possible with aphasia?
Yes. What it's really, I didn't realize just again, I continue to say the brain is so powerful, but part of that powerful is that it is creating the rules, this grammar and syntax. It's really is just bringing in what they hear every moment of your time when you're a child. They get to hear it, they can understand it, and little by little, they're building those neural networks such that they have built up what turns out to be a set of rules. We don't think about that way. You know, we do talk about them in school as if you know something, they'll say, oh, do this instead of this. But you get there based on just experiencing, just hearing it enough times that it begins to make you understanding that now, oh, because of these rules, I can say this land that unites, or whatever it might be, based on those individual words that really start at the very beginning with just the letters and then the words, and then building with the rules, building up those sentences. But yes, that's how plasticity works.
Well,
that's why we also want to get into the educational community, because plasticity, as I say, is the foundation of all learning. So even just learning a little bit about how the brain works really gives teachers another powerful tool to understand, again, even just a little bit about how the brain works from teaching perspective.
It's my understanding that they use flashcards a good bit, both words and pictures, and sometimes both, like an apple and an apple, and they show you the picture of the apple. Right. You guess apple, and they show you, or you can't guess apple, and they show you. Did you get a lot of help from speech and language pathologists, or did you do a lot of it on your own?
Well, like all people with aphasia, you're lucky. If you're lucky, you have a good SLP or any SLP. I had good, what I call good insurance. I got 30 sessions, 30 minutes each, spread across 4 months, and that gave me 15 hours of therapy spread across 4 months. Then think about how many thousands of miles of fiber have to be rebuilt. And you realize, giving plasticity, that it requires this repetitive, persistent language activities every day for the rest of your life. And then realize, oh, those 15 hours with my therapist, they are all good, but also just the beginning of this marathon. So yes, I even wrote an article to the SLPs about why they are from a shipbuilding perspective, they are the trim tabs of aphasia, meaning that if you know what a trim tab is, it's a rudder within a rudder. And with these huge ships, they still require a rudder, and they are so big, hundreds of tons of steel, you need another rudder within the rudder that drives it to move and to move the ship. And that's what the SLPs are. They are the trim tabs, but on the other side, that's all they can do. After that, you're on your own. After 15 hours, now it's up to you. Now go back to motivation, practice, 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 practice.
Well, everybody in this community understands that you don't get better half an hour at physical or speech pathology, once a week or even twice a week, that you really got to have to do your homework.
Right. Now,
One of my
Rebecca.
questions, do you know Carl McIntyre?
Carl?
McIntyre.
No.
Okay. I'll make sure that you do.
Yes.
He's a very interesting character. He's actually a friend of mine, pre-stroke. I was an actor. Worst thing in the world to get aphasia if you're an actor, because you make your living talking. And I'll send you a link to. He's gone from not being able to speak at all to like you, an aphasia advocate.
And that's Carl with a C.
Yeah, see.
Yeah, he's the one who made that beautiful video called My Aphasia or something.
Aphasia, the movie. Hope is a 4-letter word.
Right, right. Yes, we have met over the years. I just couldn't write it down what you had said, but yes, he is a great guy with a great video.
Yeah, actually 140 people in the Charlotte community came together and put that video together in a film. They shot on film in like 11 days. All volunteers. I had Carl on a couple of months ago, and we showed the movie. And at the end, I jokingly said I probably know 15 or 20 people and I watched the credits, and I knew 26 out of the 140. And that was just a fabulous thing because the community came together, and that's where I stole the. When I said earlier, it happens to more than one person. There's a line in there that I love called, and it says, "What happens to one happens to two," because it happened to Carl's wife and his kids. So,
Rebecca's got her hand up.
Oh, okay.
Have you used musical intonation therapy as a technique in your recovery?
It was interesting. I'm not terribly good with music, but I could begin to see that there was a difference between able to speak versus able to sing. And I wrote down some stuff about why that is the way it is. But then I had other friends of mine who were mute and then got better at speaking, but they can now speak, even though they look like they're drunk. My friend, I've told you before, she looks like she's drunk. When she sings, she sounds perfectly.
Yes.
Perfectly. And you go, oh my, that's why she's always here with the training we do, because the cops already think you're drunk. And then she sings and they go, oh my God, that's how the brain is working. So yes, not that I know this, but I know other people who do it, and it's pretty amazing.
Rebecca, we're trying to work with Lauren. Tom lives, 15, 20 miles from Portland?
Yeah, 40 minutes or so, depending.
Yeah. So Tom lives near Med Rhythms and have been making a connection, trying to connect him and Lauren and Med Rhythms. I'll say a couple things I know, and that is I used to go back to the Tuesday, Thursday inpatient stroke meeting because when I was sitting in a wheelchair, I thought it was really powerful when other stroke survivors walked in. That was big to me. So I made sure I walked in a number of times and said, yeah, I was sitting in that chair just like you. Anyway, there I met one time a minister who could not say a word, but he could sing perfectly all the hymns. And he never really sang before. He So that's interesting. I also know someone who had TBI. She very much presented like a stroke survivor. Got hit on the right, hit in the language center, left side affected, and everything. And her first breakthrough was her sister, you know, riding her around to different places, would put on her favorite old music, the songs that she loved pre-stroke on the radio, and eventually she started mouthing the choruses. Then she started singing the choruses, and other words in the songs came back to her. So language, I mean, singing and music is very powerful. And
If I could comment on that.
sure.
Yeah, a couple of things. First, just quickly, in the late 1950s, there was a rock group, Jan and Dean. They're contemporaries of the early Beach Boys. Two of their hits were Little Old Lady from Pasadena and Dead Man's Curve. Jan was in an automobile accident in which the left side of his brain was damaged and he was paralyzed on the right side of his body, and he had Broca's aphasia. But he could still sing his old songs fluently.
Amazing.
And that's because singing is controlled by the right hemisphere, whereas language by the left. The other thing I want to mention is a new study that was published in 2021 by a group in Finland. And it dealt with people with Broca's aphasia and a new therapy that they introduced in the first 2 months after their stroke. They divided the people into 3 groups. One group listened to singing music for 2 hours a day for 2 months. A second group listened to instrumental music for 2 hours a day for 2 months. And the third group listened to basically audiobooks, that is talking, 2 hours a day for 2 months. Then a month after that, they tested all 3 groups for their ability to talk, and they looked at MRI. Actually, it was a special type of MRI image of their left frontal lobe to look at, it was called diffusion tensor imaging, to look at the strength of the axon pathways in their left frontal lobe. And what they found was the group that listened to the singing music were significantly better than the other 2 groups in their ability to talk, and that significantly stronger or heavier axon pathways in their left frontal lobe.
Wow. Well, can you send me that article if you're able?
I've got it on my computer. If you send me your email address,
I'll make sure. I'll do that. I'll connect you.
Send me your email address and I will send you a copy of that article.
And if my chat is there, it gives you my email on the chat from
I'll make sure I also send you a joint email.
Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, it's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, so it sounds like if people in our community want to get involved in helping you, that there's a way. I mentioned to you before we started the meeting that I formed a little group. That might be a way of doing it. I'm not trying to steal your thunder in any way. I'm trying to bring, people who want to help together with people who know how to help. And so I'll make sure, like I did when I promoted this, I put all of your links when we put this up, and then in the description under YouTube, we can put, some stuff about how to get in contact with you. And if you want to volunteer, here's where to go, or here's an email to write to, either yours or your assistants or whatever you want to put. I'll coordinate it with you, and we'll see if we can drive some people to
Sure.
towards your community. One other thing you said to me one time was you had some other PowerPoint stuff, that you had some other resources that you might be willing to present here in the future, and would be real interested in that in terms of that's the flip side. You know, what can we do to help you? What resources do you have that can help the people in our community? I want to get both sets of traffic going.
Sure, absolutely.
So we can talk about that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but that would be stupendous. Like Dr. Hetzler, I found out he had a couple more, and we got him to come back and do four presentations, and they're really valuable to people because they can't necessarily be here on Tuesday. The other thing is stuff like this or all four of Dr. Hetzler's. They're evergreen. You know, somebody 5 years from now can look at the language centers in the brain aren't going to change. So, you know, that presentation is great, whether you were there one Tuesday a couple of months ago or whether you find it 3 years from now.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to do, trying to make these things have a life beyond Tuesday.
Right.
So
Right. Sounds good.
Yes, you know what, Ralph? I gave that talk before 4 presidents.
You
Really?
did?
Yeah, I just got back from Mount Rushmore.
Oh. I didn't figure it out, but I knew something like that was coming because I love Dr. Hetzler's sense of humor.
That's funny.
So were you just standing there reading it to him?
Yes.
Yes.
That's funny.
I
They
love it.
didn't get up and leave.
They didn't get up.
Get the upper leave.
No.
Oh, that's too
Then
funny.
that's a measure of success when your audience doesn't leave.
Right.
Right. Too funny.
All right. Well, Dr. Broussard, I want to thank you so much for coming in.
Thank
And
you.
I titled this Intro to Aphasia Nation because I hope that's what it is. I hope that there are more follow-ups. I hope that people
Absolutely.
from our community who are interested in what you're doing, you know, both in terms of helping you or getting help from you, will engage. And I'll make sure I put you in touch with David,
Yeah.
the Traumatic Brain Awareness Network, and Carl. And I'll send the email to between you and Dr. Hetzler just to make sure. And
Thank you.
Thank you. The,
No.
Also, Ralph, if you want to, you can send me all the emails because I can put you on the list. You'll get the monthly articles and video every month.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure that I'll coordinate that with you so that we offer that to other people.
Right. Right.
Because the people in the group that are recovering from aphasia, they're people that are fairly far down the road that want to help other people. But all that would be useful. So let's see the monthly stuff. I've got to write down all these notes because I got 7 things to do after this meeting. So,
Thank you very much.
no, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. And thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you very much. Thanks for bringing us together. So this is good. This is good to make more groups like this.
Thank you for your presentation.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Bruce.
All
Thank
right.
you, Jennifer. Thank you all.
Thank you.